Hi everybody, and welcome to the second in the sessions of the Contact Center Network. I'm really pleased to be able to bring these sessions to the Contact Center community, and I'll just kind of run through some of the things that we've got going on for today and what you can expect to see. So we've got two great guest speakers that joined. Doug Casterton from N26, a global workforce management specialist, and Harvey Gilbert, who's a business culture specialist from Flow. And both Doug and Harvey give us a really good insight into some of the challenges that are facing the contact center industry right now, and how culture and what we can do in workforce management can kind of help bridge some of those cultural issues as well, which is really great to see. And then we also did a bit of an Ask the Audience section and had guest questions coming in throughout the session. So hopefully it brings some insight to you guys and help with some of the challenges that you've got. But just before we crack on with the session, why have we created the Contact Center Network? Well, to put simply, it's to bring the contact center community together. I'm really passionate about contact centers. I'm really passionate about partnering with contact centers to provide a really great customer experience. And for those that have been on previous sessions, I focus on customer experience through the lens of three things in terms of people, process, and leadership. And I firmly believe, looking at that customer experience triangle, that if we get all those things right, we will provide a great customer experience to customers that go through our contact center. So we're really passionate about making sure that the processes are right in contact centers, making sure that the people capability is spot on so that your people can deliver a great customer experience through either the sales process or the soft skills and the service that they bring to your customers. And then making sure that we obsess about the leadership capabilities within our business and making sure that your team managers and your team leaders within your organization are suitably equipped to have great conversations with your people, either that coaching or development discussions that ultimately then feeds into that whole customer experience. So really pleased to be able to bring this to everybody today, and looking forward to kind of seeing how you react to some of the guest speakers and some of the questions that come out. And I will hand over firstly to Harvey Gilbert.
The coronavirus, obviously the biggest thing, if we were to generalize for the impact that this has had on contact centers at the moment, organizations that are used to being at in-office environment, you have all of your group of people on a floor or over a couple of floors, all in one space. Therefore, if you are an organization that currently runs a good culture, all of the things that you have in place to make that culture actually happen have been based upon having an in-office environment. The biggest change with this is that's changed now. I'm sure there are some exceptions to the rules, which some offices are still running, but on the whole, like my partner who works in a contact center is now working from home. Fundamental change. So what has to happen now is companies need to restart the process and think, okay, these are the things we want to be as an organization. How do we actually deliver those things and create that culture in this new environment? So that's what I'm doing with all of my clients at the moment. You have to go back to basics and you have to rerun the process. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. I want to talk about the process and the essence of the process. It's never been any different. This comes from modeling all of the great organizations, from whether it's the Apples of today and the Innocents and the John Lewis, or whether it's Walmart back in the 80s. It's always been the same, and this is how you create a culture. So I want to run through this now. So there are 5 phases, and as mine has done, the last one is probably cut out in the end. The first stage of building a culture is to define what you want to be as an organization. Now, most companies do this. Most companies, if you go onto their About Us page, you'll see some stuff of core values and purpose and mission, however they phrase it. This is the foundations of everything that a great organization does. The important part here, and this is the part that often goes missing, is it has to really mean something. All of the great organizations, if you were to go and ask if you were to have asked Steve Jobs, or if you were to go and ask Jeff Bezos, what's the purpose of the company and what's their why, they would have an outpouring of passion for their reasons. That's the bit that often goes missing. You've got the things, the purpose, the core values, the constitution, however you want to do it. I've got my own process that I take clients through for that, but it's all the same thing. What do you define yourself as an organization? The important part is you have to be emotionally connected to what it is that you're defining yourself as a company. Otherwise, you're not going to do it, and you're not going to do it with the same vigor. So that's the first part. You have to define what it is. So there's lots of different organizations on this call today. My clients, if I start working with them, often they have defined the stuff, but it doesn't really mean anything. It's stuff they feel like they should be saying, or stuff that their competitors have said, a myriad of things. If at this current point you think, do you know what, I don't think we're really rock solid and connected to what we're defining ourselves as a business here, you have to do that work. The second part is then to design the culture. So you've got these words you've come up with in the first phase of defining. So whether that is, again, your mission, your values, your identities, but then you need to figure out a way to translate them from words into action. Essential. Otherwise, they are just meaningless words, which, again, I'm sure all of you can think of some examples, having worked for companies that they say one thing, do another. So when we talk about designing the culture, you take the essence of what you've defined yourself as, you map out your business, and you think, okay, how can we deliver these things all the time in every single thing we do forever? Simple as that. I'll move on. Instilling the culture. Some companies do this bit really well. Some companies have, when you come in on your first day, your induction day is at a new company, the CEO will give a rousing 20-minute address, and you leave the room thinking, oh my God, what an amazing company. Maybe it's at the annual Christmas event, or maybe it's at a team meeting or a town hall event, or whatever it might be. These are really, really powerful moments that can create a charge in an organization. I used to work for a company, Metro Bank, a challenger bank in London, going through troubles now, but they were a great example of basically the purpose of Metro Bank was to create a new culture within banking. And every 3 months they'd have a town hall event where the CEO, Craig Donaldson, would give an address to the company, and every single person would leave that room and leave the offices that day thinking, oh, what a great company to work for. These are really, really powerful moments that can happen at big things like that, company events, inductions, annual events, but it can happen on smaller scales as well, with managers reinstilling, this is what we define ourselves as, and this is the purpose of the company. However, if the next bit isn't done, which is actually embedding these things into the business, it doesn't mean anything. In fact, it will actually make people annoyed. When you go in and the CEO gives a address, you think, oh, what a great company to work for. He talked for 10 minutes about how important integrity is, and then the next day your manager does something that isn't depicting integrity. It's annoying, if anything. So as powerful as instilling can be, it's nothing if the actual things aren't put into the business. Now, the embedding phase are taking these things that you've designed as a company, these ways to actually deliver what you want to be as a company, actually putting them into the business. And I've got a little example I'd like to give to you. And Gary mentioned that there might be someone from Airbnb on the call. I don't know if they are, put it in the chat, but a really nice example from Airbnb. So Airbnb, company famous for having a great culture. And one of the things that's most important to them as an organization is openness and honesty. Now, they did an engagement survey, a culture engagement survey, to sort of test the waters to see how employees are actually feeling about the way that the company's run, rather than just the owners, the leaders of the company having an idea of what people are experiencing. They got an anonymous survey of what are people actually experiencing. And to cut a long story short, the result came back and they weren't as open and honest as they thought they were. So what they decided to do is, okay, well, we need a way to design a way to actually put this in the business and embed this into the business so that these words we define ourselves as aren't just words. So what they thought, okay, well, what's a way that we can be more open and honest? They thought, okay, well, how about if we have a periodic meeting where team managers from across the whole business get together, and they've consulted with their teams of, what can we do better, and what can we improve on, and they come forward and we have a really open and honest meeting. So they decided that's what they were going to do. So what they did is they put in this periodic meeting, and they named it Elephants, Dead Fish and Vomit. Now, elephants stand for the elephants in the room, the big things going on in the company. The dead fish are the things that we thought we dealt with, but I don't think we've quite dealt with that properly, because it's still, we can smell you get the gist. And the vomit are the things we just need to get off of our chest. Now, it's a well branded, and it's hard to forget that example, but it is a great example of they've defined themselves as being an open and honest organisation. They've done an engagement surveys, which if done right can be really powerful things, and they've decided that, well, we're not just going to get the results and then not do anything about it. We're going to find a way to actually be that thing and actually deliver that thing. So guess what happens now when they send out that engagement survey? What do their results come back for when they're talking about openness and honesty? The company agree you're open and honest. And there are a million examples of small things, big things that you can do to actually make sure the things you define yourself actually happen. And the last part, that if your screen's like mine is cut out on the right-hand side, is to grow the culture. This is a never-ending quest for perfection, which you'll never meet. And it's something that needs to be refined and built. And almost what you need to do is, when you get to that grow phase, you need to sort of start again. It's a continuous loop you need to go through to make sure you're doing that. Going back to this picture of what's going on at the moment, it is an absolutely essential time to think, okay, well, we've got our culture now. And if you are one of these people on the call that work for an organisation that do have a great culture, or if you run a business that does have a great culture, you need to figure out ways to design ways to get these things you define yourself as actually happening in this new environment. That makes sense? I'm really missing group interaction. I hate just looking at my stupid face on the screen. Okay. I wanted to reference the most common mistake that happens in organizations. And it's a word that comes from psychology, and it's a word incongruence. And I use it 50,000 times a day. Now, incongruence means basically a lack of alignment. So in essence, what we're talking about is a company having their things that they define themselves as, and what they actually do, the two things aren't aligned. They're like oil and water. They're not on the same line. It's the most common mistake companies make, and it is as simple as companies don't think about this stuff in the right way. How simple is this? I mean, building a great culture, you define what you want to be, you figure out ways to do that, and then you make sure you do that forever. It is as simple as that. It's not necessarily easy to come up with all the great answers. But what companies do is they define themselves as something. They don't really connect to it. They just think, oh, we'll say we're, amazing customer service, or what, integrity, or whatever they might say. And then they go and they just build their business model to make money, or, whatever they want to do, and they react to things. And then if you actually take a step back and look at it, the two things don't mix in. I was working with an example I like to cite is I was working with a recruitment organisation about 3 months ago, before this all happened. And so I can't remember exactly how they worded it, but one of the things they define themselves as is they want to have like an amazing customer experience, like for their clients to be really looked after, not like just a typical recruitment firm. Then in place, so one of the things they have embedded in their business model is they have a very aggressive turnover-based commission system. So basically what happens is they're encouraging people by numbers to stack CVs up, ship them out, and get them in there as quickly as possible. So the thing they're defining themselves as is like an amazing client experience, being different from all the rest of the recruitment firms. And they've got something that all the other recruitment firms do. So what actually happens? The behavior is they act like all other recruiters. And it is just from a lack of, my business is called flow because it's flow thinking. It's thinking, well, what do we define ourselves as? What's most important to us? How do we deliver that? How do we make sure we continue to deliver that forever? Gary, am I on time? Am I good?
You're on track. I think Joe's made some really good points there in terms of from her business. This is her experiences about what you stop doing rather than start doing to shift that incongruence. What you permit, you promote. I like that phrase, Joe. Joe, do you just want to take yourself off mute for a second and just expand on that in terms of your experience, in terms of culture and how it kind of fits?
Yeah. So what you permit, you promote. I think often the incongruence comes from behaviors or processes that are against, and I think this is what you're trying to say as well, Harvey, that are against what you're trying to promote or the culture that you've articulated. So visibly stopping those behaviors when seen, whether it's people or processes or whatever, I think can often have a stronger impact than just starting something new. Because often something new is seen as, oh, that's the new thing. It's actually been really strict in that stopping things as well.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I think a phrase that I like to use is when you have defined what you want to be as a company, it is all about fanatical execution of that. And it is about being congruent in everything you do, whether it is you're talking about, some of the things like the recruitment example, having a commission system in place, or, being open and nice and having these meetings in place. It does come down to individual behavior. And something that's really important about this is culture always stems from the top. STEM is an important word. Culture is impacted at all levels. It always stems from the top. If, let's say, a value of a company is sort of caring, however they want to phrase it, and then the CEO is in a board meeting, and while other people are talking, he's sat there looking at his phone. It's almost like a pathway that you unlock for other people. Other people look at the CEO and go, oh, he answers his phone in meetings. Come back 6 months later, everyone looks at their phones in meetings. And it's these little things that, if you isolate them, they can seem trivial, but they stack and they have creeping impact to 6 months down the line. You've got a company that actually, we don't really care about each other. We're not really listening to what each other are saying. So it is about fanatical execution, which is why it's so important to really define what you are as a company. And they can't just be words. You have to connect more to them than just words, which is why when I work with companies, we create a constitution, and we do it at certain levels. We do it at the exec team level, then we kind of filter it down, because it's one of those things. If you go to the instill phase and the CEO standing up there and talking about, oh, these are all the things we want to be as a company, and everyone's sat there thinking, well, you don't do any of those things. Guess what? It's not going to work.
And I think there's probably a good point that everybody's thinking, Harvey, around culture and remote-based working cultures, because we've all been shifted into a remote working environment at the moment, and quite often the culture of businesses is sometimes defined by the environment in which you work. So what tips or advice would you give to anybody on the call who now has a very different culture in their working environment than maybe one that they've got in the office where everybody's kind of together and they've got more of a feeling of community? How would you give any tips for that?
My tip is think about it. And I know that might be a bit of an annoying answer. There's a million ways to do all of these things. There is a million ways to do all of these things. I can't tell you how many examples I've got of great companies that come up with a thing that they define themselves as, and they've thought of loads of different ways to actually deliver on those things. All of your companies you work for will have different cultures, whether that's something that's happened organically or whether it's deliberate. If it's deliberate, it's much better, by the way. But what you have to do is think, what do we want to be, and how can we do that? I don't know. I don't know what you want to be. I don't know what your company wants to be. I do know there are ways to actually deliver that. But it is as simple as, okay, everything's changed, whether it's temporary or whether, like my partners, say my partner works in a contact center and is going to be permanently working from home now. So it's a permanent change. So it's a case of thinking, okay, well, what we used to do when we had a great culture, when it was office-based, what can we do? What things can we put in place to make sure the things that are most important to us actually happen? You guys are whether you're a manager or an employee or a leader of the business, you guys, I don't know your business. You guys are with have got the brains and the creativity to do that. It's just a case of sitting down and thinking about that. It really is as simple as that.
Yeah, and Sarah Lawrence has made a good comment in the chat to say she used to work for an organisation that talked about fairness. It was fair to customers, but not to staff. Massive disconnect and a toxic culture. We hear that a lot in the contact centre world. It's treating customers fairly, and we treat customers fairly, but we don't treat our staff as fairly as we would our customers. So real kind of
a great
position, if you like.
A great example of an incongruency. And it comes back to this. So they define themselves as fair, but they don't really mean it. They're saying that because it's kind of like, well, you've got to be fair because you've got to treat customers fairly. It's like a forced thing they define themselves as. Whereas the companies that really, really care about what they are as an organization, they deliver that in everything they do. It is that fanatical execution. And again, it's a way of thinking about things. You have to think in a flow. You have to sit down and go, okay, we define ourselves as, let's map out the whole business. How do we do this thing of fairness, as an example, in everything that we do?
Yeah. And just before we move on to Doug, Harvey, let's have the last question from Joe. Joe's a really good question here, Joe Chapman. And it says, the shift to a virtual world, how do we think this will impact culture, evolution and development?
Say that last bit again, Gary. Sorry, it cut out.
The shift to a virtual world, how do we think this will impact culture, evolution and development?
Culture, evolution and development. I don't know. I've got no idea. I think it's going to be very interesting. I think we're all in the same boat here. I think it's all a bit up in the air as to whether it seems like, you know, led from some of the big companies like the Googles of the world, where it seems like they're planning on having people more remotely working. And it seems like to me, but you know, I don't know better than anyone else, it seems like that's the way people are moving. I've heard a lot of people sort of, you know, giving up the lease on their offices and thinking, do you know what, this works perfectly well. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting. I think as time goes on, it'll be really interesting to see how people feel about it, how people feel over long periods of time not having that office environment, because we're in this kind of like mad apocalypse time at the moment. Once that all passes and it becomes business as usual, I think it'll be very interesting. But my answer is I have no idea.
So some really interesting comments coming through in the chat, and I think this is a really interesting one because cultures are changing. I think Warren Pickstone said the same, something similar. Is it nature or nurture? And I think the biggest takeaway for me from this is, other than dead fish, elephant and vomits, is that your culture is what you make of it. And actually, if you've employed people to work in an office environment and now you've made them work in a home environment and now you're thinking of changing that kind of construct, it really is worthwhile communicating with your employees to understand what they want and what they need and what the likely impacts of that are on potential attrition when you bring people back and you say to them, we now require you to work from home. So
if I can just jump in on that, Gary, really quickly. So that's a really interesting point of nature and nurture. And the nature bit, there is an element of that. And the nature comes from the nature of the people who run the business. So again, if you look at the great companies, you look at the Apples and the Innocents and the John Lewis, their culture is kind of like the personality of, like Apple is like the kind of personality of Steve Jobs. That's where the nature comes into it. But the difference of Apple is a good example of when Steve Jobs left in the 80s and the business Apple nearly fell apart, to when he went back until he passed away. The second reign, he actually nurtured and built a culture, which is why they are still the business they are today. So the first bit comes from, it stems from the top. When I say it has to mean something, that often means it coincides with the nature of the leaders of the business. But everything past that point is nurture.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I could talk about culture all day and I could talk about what we're going to be talking about next all day. But sadly, this is only an hour. I'm trying to keep it punchy. So if there is feedback after this that there's not enough time, let me know and we could potentially look to extend some of the future ones. I'm going to ask Harvey to stop sharing his screen and I'm going to tee up Doug. Where are you, Doug?
I'm here. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I've discovered the new normal.
Do you need some technical assistance with screen share? Do you need me to share my screen, Doug?
Yes, please. Yeah. So
yeah.
I've discovered the new normal, working from home and technology challenges. I'm now dialing in from my phone. I hope everybody can hear. Otherwise, it's going to be interesting. I absolutely cannot see anything. I can just about see. Okay. So here we go.
My screen.
Let's see how this one goes. Cool. If you can go to the next slide, Gary, that'd be great. So really what I want to talk about here is some of the developments of the contact center and the role that workforce management is playing in these technology improvements, these process improvements, and just how workforce management is evolving over time. Because I think that the days of spreadsheets are certainly still here, but we've moved reams beyond that. So one of the things that is now becoming a quite big theme in contact centers, and I did a quick poll before coming onto this with a group that I run with workforce management, and found actually interesting that nearly 30% of the people in part of that group were already doing or incorporating things like WhatsApp into their channel mix for the contact center. And of course, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, WeChat, these are all things that have become really, really big in our everyday life. There's now 4 billion monthly active users. And I think we'd probably all recognise that we use it every single day. And I'd imagine if we did a hold up hands on this, we'd be looking at, how many of you, for example, have sent a message this week to say, can I organise a phone call, for example? That's a version of this type of messaging, and it's really about fire and forget, which is quite perfect in a hectic life or a modern world where we're very connected, mobile, and on the move. The interesting thing for that's, I guess, is developing for the contact center is that with the emergence of things like WhatsApp for Business, Apple have got their own version for iMessage, and there are various different companies, including the one which I'm currently working for, that are looking to build in-house type solutions as well. It's interesting because it gives another contact channel that customers really like and are using a lot today. The important bit here for the contact centers is that it's very similar, or it is exactly the same really, but in shorter messages as email. And of course, when you look through the millennia, we've all been using this type of messaging through writing letters. So it's not something that's completely different. It's just the way it's deployed. And from a contact center perspective, like with any type of messaging, the really difficult bit here is delivery of context. So when you've got a situation where a message perhaps is sent first but isn't replied to instantly, maybe the conversation may be bridging across 1, 2, even 3 days, in small segments, but in a quicker pace. You're likely to have situations where agents might not having the full context because they didn't deal with the message, the conversation from end to end. They're picking it up perhaps halfway through that conversation. The benefits from the incorporation from a workforce management perspective is that you can utilize this type of messaging in the same manner as live chat, in respect to the agents can be working on more. That concurrency works well with chatbots, just like live chat. It's not immediate, so you don't have to reserve the type of occupancy that you might have to ensure that you're meeting service levels, say on live chat or telephony. And it's really great for peak management. So if you're looking to smooth some of your demand out and move it throughout the day in order to improve your schedule fit, it's really great. The challenges for planning is that it's a new channel, and like with all channels that are introduced into a contact center, they create incremental demand. So the challenges in workforce management is really mapping out the ecosystem around, as you introduce these types of channels, how do they connect? What's the customer journey? How do you make them consistent? And how do you ensure that, for example, you're setting the right service level targets to meet the required customer experience? For example, the response on the first message in, say, a WhatsApp reply is much more important, or the speed of it, is much more important than say, if you, the later messages. I'll stop there for a second. Is there any questions around
Doug,
this?
I was going to say there's been a couple of good questions actually coming through that, just on that theme. One from Sarah Lawrence around, is there a customer expectation that by using messaging, they have a quicker turnaround time, and does it lead to more complaints if the expectations aren't managed? Yes.
It's like with any type of channel, it's really important to match your response and speed to the type of query. And that you're meeting expectations. Sometimes actually you can manage the conversation by, just like you would with any conversation, by setting expectation. So for example, on the first message, you're likely to want to incorporate a faster speed of response. because the customer at this point is going, are they going to answer me? It's the same phenomenon that you get with email, which is why you see a lot of automated replies and say, we will respond to you in X amount of time. The expectation, of course, with this type of messaging is quicker. They're expecting, say, a reply within the next hour or 2 hours rather than the next day. The messages that follow, as long as you're, say, setting expectation, you might say, we're still looking into this, or these types of things. Actually, there's not an expectation that you need to deliver an instant reply, if that answers the question.
I think so. Sarah, shout up if that doesn't. We had another question from Dan Lloyd. Dan, yours is a bit of a techie question. Do you want to take yourself off mute and ask Doug? It was around how do you build that in from a resource planning perspective? So if you want to take yourself off mute, Dan Lloyd, you can ask your question.
I'm off mute now. You got me now? Yeah, so we offer a full omnichannel solution from Cirrus, and one of the common questions that we come across from workforce management is, with a phone call, you get a clear start and end time. You can resource against that, where a conversation on an omnichannel like WhatsApp could go over a matter of days, but only really have a very small contact, like 2 or 3 minutes of the agent's time. What's the best way to incorporate that into your workforce management tool?
Good question.
I think, it's a great question. First of all, from a customer experience perspective, it's really important that you're measuring the end-to-end journey, because that's the way the customer sees it. However, from a planning perspective, you're looking to break those into messages. So rather than, say, the capturing the handle time for the end-to-end conversation, you look to capture the instances, the number of instances, and the length of each of those conversations, or back and forward messages, if that makes sense. Because if you try to capture the session, you'll run into the same problems that the colleague would have, in terms of when they receive a message. Context is everything, right? So and the technology that wraps around the CRM part of it will also facilitate the information that you need to do the planning part of it as well.
Brilliant.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
Shall I do next slide, Doug? Sorry.
Let's do next slide.
My duties.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah. So another particular theme that I'm seeing with workforce management is that, I guess, data and technology, it already supports the entire planning cycle, from capacity planning to scheduling to intraday to reporting, and then back to forecasting. Throughout this cycle, the amount of insight that passes through a workforce management team is huge. How the customer's behaving, what employees are doing, how they're behaving, what's the cost of you running that operation, what sort of revenue are you generating. All these types of information are absolutely key and critical to creating a robust workforce plan. However, in terms of that information, it often goes by untapped by an operation. And I think that there's a really, I mean, you've already seen it, but there's a big next logical step where smarter combination of data that a workforce management team touches with, and then combining that with operational insight, scenario planning, and ops decision validation. It makes a lot of sense. It's something that happens as part of the planning cycle anyway, but using that information then to broaden that into deeper conversation, deeper insights and conversations is really interesting. And actually what you're seeing is a blurring of the lines between a business intelligence team and a workforce management team, hence the workforce intelligence bit that are labelled here. And the type of skills that you're now commonly seeing in a workforce management team are beyond just Excel or how to use the workforce management system. In my team today, I have people that are able to code in SQL, in R, in Python, and it opens up all sorts of really interesting opportunities in terms of insight.
So I've got a question around that, Doug, because this was one submitted on the Survey Monkey that we did, and it was it's around kind of the data mining of it and using that intelligence. So it's, what strategies do you recommend to allow for better data mining to derive or predict call patterns, given that customer behaviour has drastically changed because of COVID?
Okay, so in terms of just general data management, the you can put whatever tool you want in terms of business intelligence tool, and often the gold standard would often be broader, so like something like Tableau, for example. However, if the data warehouses that sit behind that have not been organized correctly, they don't have the correct joins, and if people follow in that respect, they haven't been created in a star structure, it's very difficult to extract and join the data when you're creating insight that maybe is bridging across multiple systems. So that having a really clear data management structure, especially when you're dealing with big systems and multiple systems that are drawing reams and reams of data, that's the key, because it's a bit like I guess akin it to when you first create a when you first implement a workforce management system, it's very easy not to think about how you're going to structure that going forward, and it very, very quickly becomes chaos. And the more you're bringing in new systems and filling up those data warehouses with data, you don't have the right structure, impossible to get to it. Really, really key. And that's just a general practice, I think, that bridges across all.
Good question. Moving to the next one for you.
Yeah, gig economy, bit of a buzzword. I think that's the theme, probably some of the things that I'm talking about here. The rise of Uber and Lyft and the various other food delivery companies, and their use of gig economy workforce just exploded over the last decades, and it's brought with it different ways of working for employees and employers. It provides extreme flexibility for employees by giving them full control over how to spend each hour and minutes of their working day. Instead of the principle of it is, instead of centrally scheduling the shifts for your people, gig economy scheduling allows workers to independently set their hours, often with no advance warning needed, but based upon, say, what you've required to be fulfilled, or you based on the forecast that you're expecting in terms of workload to come through. So instead of shift patterns being published in larger blocks of time over longer periods of time, gig economy scheduling makes work time available for employees to self-service, to self-schedule in much smaller blocks of time and with reduced limitations on how they can work. I think that there's now cases of this materializing in contact centers. A good UK example one would be if anyone's come across Sensei, who run a work from home outsourcing solution. They employ gig economy type scheduling principles. So some of their people will effectively be scheduling themselves in very small blocks. They might only do an hour one day and 9 or 10 on the next. So it works really well actually with work from home, where you've taken out the restrictions around commuting, which is always a difficulty that you need to incorporate. And it helps with better shift alignment, it's greater agility of your workforce to match short notice increase or decreases in workloads. And yeah, many other benefits. There are detractors. It's not for everybody. I think for financial service institutions, it's difficult because of regulation. There's concerns around, does it put too much of the onus on for doing business expenses onto employees, because a lot of the time it's deployed with things like 0-hour contracts, which of course have a really bad name because they've been deployed badly. But I certainly am seeing this more and more being incorporated, not necessarily as the only solution, but as a complementing solution to the other types of workforce, say part-time, full-time, but also now potentially gig economy as well. And I'll stop there.
We've got,
I don't know how I'm doing for time.
We've probably the last slide and last question, I think, and it's probably one that's probably most relevant. Should we go on? I'll give you the question because it'll tee you up nicely for the next slide.
Cool.
It's, what role do you think AI will play in the workforce management in medium and short term, and which role workforce management, especially planning, will have in the future with fewer human resources?
Yeah. So the use the use of AI and machine learning, just like any other function, is here now in workforce management. I think it's still fairly limited, but it's developing really quickly. And there are lots of workforce management system vendors now that are developing this functionality as part of their out-of-the-box solutions. There are others, and actually I noticed there's one on this particular call from Key Story that are also playing in the space. So the greater integration to facilitate data exchange between workforce management systems is a key part of this. So your system integrating and drawing data, but also putting data out into things like routing systems, LMS, payroll, quality, marketing, CRM, customer surveys. The list could go on and on and on. And theoretically, any workforce management process or action that follows a logical path can be automated. And it can be automated in a way that cuts down time-consuming action. And there are multiple user cases. So, for example, I think a really interesting one is the real-time automation. So, as we are all going through digital transformation, we're finding that the customers are becoming more demanding. They've got multiple channels to be following, and you're seeing a lot more volatility. It's much more difficult to get the forecast right. So therefore, that actually puts the onus onto the real-time team. It makes them more important, because how they manage that variance then becomes really key to whether or not you can deliver on the service level that you're looking to achieve. And this is where, for example, it plays not just in how do I redeploy the workforce to say meet unexpected queue, but also the other way around. So when I've got a ton of unexpected availability, what am I going to do with it? And a really good example of one that I've utilised as a user case before is integrating into your LMS system, so that you then got a three-way combination where it's drawing data out with say actual volumes or handle times and all the different metrics that you've got in your workforce plan. It's readjusting and reforecasting in real time. It's then looking for predefined and agreed actions with what you're going to do with that variance. So in the case of availability, it may well be looking for who's completed these compulsory e-learning sessions, who needs to do it, and then automatically rescheduling their time in order to deploy e-learning and communicating with them to let them know their schedule's been updated, letting their team leader know, and then tracking on whether or not they actually complete it and whether they do it. And if they don't, pushing that back into your LMS system to say this needs to be rescheduled. The examples are endless, and today we're using in the company I work for an AI algorithm to improve our forecasting. One that some maybe know about, called Profit, which was an open source Facebook solution. If you think about it, integration, it doesn't have to be internal sources. So integration with things like gathering weather influences or traffic on the road, these could be really, really useful for forecasting processes for, say, insurance companies or breakdown.
And I think it's really interesting, some of the stuff you've just said there, Doug, because having worked in a few different contact centers, and actually listening back to Harvey's talk, it's interesting because a lot of the challenges that a contact center has in having a great coaching culture, having a culture that is around knowledge management, and having a culture that you've got flexibility of working patterns and stuff, workforce management and culture go hand in hand. Because what tends to happen, as soon as that phone's ringing or as soon as the demand is high, everything that you were looking to invest in people, everything that you were looking to do in terms of development gets pulled. And thinking about that AI integration and how it can impact culture, what are your thoughts on how those two harmonize together?
Well, actually, yeah, if you go to the next slide.
I didn't even tee that up. Wasn't in one.
So with advancing so this is a phenomenon, isn't it, that is not just affecting workforce management, it's affecting every single segment in every single type of profession. I think that, with advancing technology and changing relationships, say, between agents and the business, it's really clear that the profile and skill set of not just the modern day workforce management, but the modern day contact center professional needs to change. And it's no longer enough to be an analytical type that sits in a dark room with a spreadsheet. I go back and I have a memory with an interview where it was going really well, and then she brought forward that I really just like sitting in that dark room, and I think that worked 10 years ago, but now you lose the really key thing and the value that we can still bring despite AI taking so much of the more manual and lengthy touch processes and automating them. And I think I read somewhere that McKinsey predicts that by 2030, employees and technology, employees with technology, data and social and emotional skills, they're going to be the most in-demand skill set. And for me, I talk about empathy a lot, because how do you take the emotional part of what we do, the emotional part, the connection with the customer, the emotional part with the employee, and entwine that with AI, data, insight, and make it valuable, because ultimately our service is to humans, and the people that are facilitating those services are still humans. So it's really key that I guess even in analytical roles that we become really good at communicating and really good at engagement.
Definitely. So I think, again, we could talk about all these topics for probably an hour themselves, but the idea of this is kind of just to bring some snippets and some valuable information. And if anybody wants any more information or wants to kind of talk to Doug about his slides and his activity, please feel free to reach out. And again, if you want a conversation with Harvey around contact center culture, or if you just want to chat with me because I'm a nice guy, please feel free to reach out. I just want to wrap up today's session and just kind of share some thoughts on your feedback count. So this is only the second session for this, and they are evolving. So I'd really appreciate your feedback. So I'm going to be sending a survey out after this. It's just got a few questions on what we can do to make these better, what types of things you would like to see. From the last session that we had, it became really clear that people want to have a bit more about employee engagement, want to talk about contact centers in terms of how they manage employee well-being and mental awareness and anxiety, and all the things that are actually probably going to become a lot more prevalent when we start to come back to the business, and when we start to manage those kind of cases, certainly from a HR perspective around absence, sickness, and future impacts on the employees that we've got in our organisation. So next month's going to be with the lovely Sunny Sandwell, who's on the call, Nick Elston, who's on the call, and also Eileen Donnelly from a company called Ripple. So please feel free to sign on to that. That's live on the Eventbrite page now. That's on the 25th. And then the July event is all around more about contact center technology and voice of the customer. So I've got some guests from a company called Cupid, Sabio, and Ipsos will be joining, which I'm really excited about. So for me, it's the final thing to say is thank you for kind of tuning in. It's not easy doing a Zoom call to so many people, and technology does hinder us somewhat, but I think Doug and Harvey, great job, really great content, some awesome questions in the chat. And what I'm going to do as well is I'll go through that chat, and if there's anything that's come out there that we've not answered today, I'm going to forward it on to Doug and Harvey, and we'll get some responses to you as well. I've recorded it from Harvey's slot, so missed the intro, unfortunately, because I forgot to press the record button. But what I'll do is I'll be saving that down, and I'll put it onto the YouTube page, and I'll cascade it out to LinkedIn audience too. But really great session. If you've got any other comments, or if anybody's got any other questions, drop them into the chat. But can I just ask everybody to just switch on the camera for a second so we can get the proverbial Zoom selfie? If you don't want to be on camera, switch yourself off. Although you all look lovely, and then we can have a quick selfie. So everybody smile and wave. There we go. Thank you very much. Who's sick of Zoom selfies so far? But we continue to do them. So I just final thank yous again to Doug and Harvey for putting that session out there. Some really great speakers, Really looking forward to next month's event as well, and good to have the some of the speakers on from Hey Sonny, give us a wave, from next week who'll be joining us as well, and who've kind of been on both, so that's awesome. Last thing to say is thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.